I've recently come to value books written by a professor, chair of psychology. His name is Richard Beck. He's chair of the psychology department at Abilene Christian University. I often laugh, can anything good come from Abilene? And this guy is amazing. And he wrote a book that really was my first introduction to him in 2021, titled, and I love this title, Searching for Magic Eels, Recovering an Enchanted Faith in a Skeptical Age. And what he does in that book is he points out that we live in a time, we live in a culture, we live in a world that has grown increasingly disenchanted. And by that, he means we have lost, as a culture, as people, this sense of a religious imagination to see God's living presence in the world. God is everywhere, he claims, but we don't see it. The world is no longer enchanted by God. We have, he claims, a pervasive cultural disenchantment with the world that affects our lives, affects our homes, it affects our churches. How many of us came this morning thinking we would see God? And his argument is, it's not that God has disappeared. He kind of says what we have really these days is a form of what he calls attention blindness. We don't expect, nor do we pay attention to the possibility of God's presence. We think of faith, if we think about it at all, as forcing ourselves to believe in unbelievable things. Or we think of faith as something that really just leads us to be good, moral, justice-seeking people. Instead, he claims, really, faith is about enchantment. Or rather, a re-enchantment. The intentional recovery of a holy capacity to see and experience God in the world. Disenchantment isn't about disbelief. Disenchantment is really about a failure to attend. Now, most of us likely know that story of Moses, shared with the children and you, the burning bush. We heard it probably in Sunday school or seen it in movies or television shows. It seems an obvious explanation, an obvious example of an encounter with God in a burning bush without it being consumed. And I must confess, I've always been a little ticked off at that story. I always thought it was a little too unfair. It's a little too easy that Moses got a burning bush where he could truly see and hear God. I have never experienced a burning bush. Come on, God, hit me between the eyes. A burning bush is easy. It gets your attention. But that's not how I experience God. That hasn't necessarily been my experience. If some of you have seen burning bushes, I'd love to hear that story. Now, people often ask me, that's not uncommon, have asked me how I experienced my call to ministry. Thinking, not so correctly, but thinking that I must have had a kind of burning bush experience calling me to ministry. A kind of burning bush moment. And that was not my experience at all. I tell them, and to be quite honest, they're a little disappointed, I think. No burning bushes, no booming voice of God calling me to become a pastor. It was more like I had an older minister friend advising me when I was younger and was thinking about considering a calling to ministry, he said to me the most wisest words. He says, if you think you are being called by God, run away. Run away as fast as you can. And if you cannot get away, it's probably a call. And so my sense of God's presence, God's call, was not a burning bush. It was not something dramatic or powerful, but more a kind of confused stumbling and bumbling until God caught my attention, not because I was particularly attuned or attended, more despite myself. That's often true when I experience God's voice, as it comes out of places and people I never expected. And if we looked at that story in Exodus, it may feel a little bit like a cheap cheat code that Moses got a burning bush. But that story in Exodus has much to say to us in this disenchanted world we live, in our kind of spiritual attention deficit disorder that we have as a society. Moses is going about his daily life, tending his father-in-law's flock of sheep, when something catches his attention. I kind of imagine it was something he saw kind of out of the corner of his eye. He glimpses something sparkling, something up on the mountainside. And in that story, I don't know if you noticed this, Moses says to himself, I must turn aside and look at this great sight. Now, the Hebrew phrase, turn aside, is an interesting one. In fact, more often than not, it's used to describe in the Hebrew Bible those who've turned aside from following God's law. So it's used more often than not in a negative way. But what it means is to depart from a path or a particular direction. In other words, Moses intentionally directed his attention a different way. He focused his attention not on his sheep or on his busyness, but on something enchanting. And he beholds a strange sight. Encountering God's presence requires a shift of our attention. Leaving one direction and going another. Again, Moses here is living his good life, wife, children, doing work that may be meaningful, but at the ordinary things that human beings do, and the glimpses of something wondrous and enchanted, he pays attention to it. And when he does, he finds holy ground. When he turns aside and looks. Now, I also have often been puzzled in this story why he had to take his shoes off, why he had to remove his sandals. And many people say because this is holy ground and maybe the ordinariness of what we pick up on our shoes and sandals doesn't belong there. But it occurs to me that in many ways it's a story that detail in that story is that he takes the ordinary shoes he walks in every day. It's a way to take them off so he can pay attention more profoundly. A physical way to express his turning aside from one path to another. And what he encounters in that burning bush is grace. A God of grace. A God who people had not been listening to, but a God who listened to a people suffering, oppression, slavery. A God who desired to set people free from suffering and pain. A God who chooses ordinary people like Moses to proclaim liberation and freedom from those suffering. And when Moses complains, who am I to go do this? God simply says, doesn't explain everything, but God simply says, you know what? I'm with you. I walk next to you. I'm beside you. I am with you through this journey. So this story about seeing God, encountering an enchanted world, is asking us one thing. Pay attention. Take off your shoes. Beck is right. We live in a disenchanted world, yet somehow God breaks in ways unexpected and surprising. It may be a burning bush, or the simple reality that God keeps chasing us down despite ourselves. Pay attention and take off your shoes. Turn aside and pay attention to God's Spirit all around you in the very simple and ordinary things of life, in the friends and family we journey with, in the daily activities that define our lives, in the gift and grace of an enchanted people who hear the call to let the people free. For all who suffer are in pain. Pay attention and take off your shoes. Now this morning, we are going to experience some holy ground together. And you can take off your shoes if you want. But in the baptism of Cameron, we are turning aside. And we are encountering the mystery of God's presence in God's call and claim on Cameron. And he can't say, "Here I am." But Trey and Susanna are going to say it for him. That long before he pays attention to God's presence, long before he really can talk about it or say what it means to him, he will experience God's love. His parents, his grandparents, his extended family, in this community of seekers who encounter God in an enchanted world. We will teach him to pay attention and take off his shoes. To God be the glory this day and forevermore. Amen.